All right, now this is going to be the third of four reaction videos to One Night in Idaho, the latest Amazon Prime special on the Idaho 4 case. And again, I know that a lot of people like to hear my take on it. A lot of people don't want to watch the documentary themselves, and so I want to be able to give them an opportunity to hear what I thought about the episodes from my own perspective. Now, here's the thing. This particular episode, number 3 of my reaction, is actually going to be a mixture of things that were said in episode 3 and 4, as well as my last reaction video. My fourth video of reactions are going to be a mixture of what was in episodes 3 and 4, if that makes any sense. So what I'm saying is there was kind of a little blending back and forth, and for me to be able to keep a consistent thought and thumbnail and title for my episode, to keep a thought going, I decided to go ahead and make this video a little bit of a mixture of 3 and 4, episode 3 and 4 in this reaction. And then my last video similarly will be a little bit of reactions from 3 and 4. So this one's going to focus on the Pappa Rodger angle, Elliot Rodger, and some of the things that Dylan did according to this documentary, and what their perspective was on that. And that happened over the course of episode 3 and 4. So again, it's a little bit of blending. And I'm going to save for that last video, the one that some of you may not want, which is the emotional and human toll of this story, and how we deal with the emotions and the anxiety and the grief and all those things, which were also kind of brought out both in episode 3 and 4 of the documentary. And I want to kind of set that aside as my final thoughts. What is the human toll? What is the emotional toll that it has taken on all of us? The families, as well as the true crime community, as well as the people who are just casually interested. What is the human toll? So that'll be the last episode. So anyways, let's get right into episode 3, which our reaction video 3, which is about 3 and 4 put together. We're going to start with Elliot Rodgers, or sorry, we're going to start with Pappa Rodgers. We're going to move to Elliot Rodgers, and we're going to end with some stuff about Dylan. I did want to say it in my reaction video 2, I did make a mistake. Clearly, several of you people pointed it out. I thought episode 2 ended with a cliffhanger that the families were called on the 29th, I think, of November, that they had somebody in custody. It turned out that, as many people pointed out, they were talking about the 29th of December. And so, yes, that makes much more sense. I don't know how I missed that. So I hope that's not a major problem. I'm not going to go back and recut the whole video for that or re-edit it. I just decided that most of you can figure out that that was just a slip on my part. So again, nobody was in custody on November 29th. That was me somehow hearing that or seeing it wrong. And again, it makes sense that it would have been December 29th. So let's get into the Pappa Rodger thing. So many people have talked about Pappa Rodgers for forever. Pappa Rodger was a figure that appeared on Facebook group, I believe, posting about the crimes right after the crimes in a group about basically the Idaho 4 murders. This individual by the name of Pappa Rodger, you've seen it on the thumbnail, had an image that looks very, very similar to Bryan Kohberger, and many people believe that Bryan Kohberger himself was the suspicious figure, Pappa Rodger, posting about his own crimes before he was arrested. Oddly enough, as this episode pointed out, Pappa Rodger ceased to post after Bryan Kohberger's arrest, leading more again to believe that Pappa Rodger and Bryan Kohberger are the same person, that Bryan Kohberger was writing under the name Pappa Rodger and commenting about his own crimes, which would be enormously creepy, but not out of the wheelhouse of probability, considering that some famous serial killers have wanted to taunt the public or to somehow stay involved in their own crime in some way. So that could be potentially a thing that's that we have to seriously consider. Now, again, let me remind you that I believe in the presumption of innocence until proven guilty in a court of law. However, let me also remind you that Bryan Kohberger has pled guilty to these crimes. And again, there is a slight nuanced difference between a confession and a guilty plea. So we'll save that for another day. I just want you to understand that while I believe in the presumption of innocence, again, I've made this abundantly clear, it is much harder to continue to talk about his presumption of innocence if Bryan Kohberger has admitted or pled guilty to the crimes. Again, slight nuance between confessing to a crime and pleading guilty, but we'll save that again for another day. What I do want to focus on is the possibility that Pappa Rodger could indeed have been Bryan Kohberger. When I looked into it, there are people who said that it wasn't likely because there was some mistakes that Pappa Rodger made that indicated that they were just lucky guesses. There are other people who said it was a freakish coincidence. One of the first things that made people really, really jump out that Pappa Rodger was indeed the killer was a statement that was made very, very early on, where Pappa Rodger, posting to a forum about people asking questions about the crime, said something to the effect of, they've been posting from the beginning that this was all done with a fixed blade knife. I believe that must mean they found the knife sheath. Or I suppose that means they found the knife sheath. This was stated by Pappa Rodger, allegedly, before the knife sheath was ever announced that they found it. The public had not been notified that there was a knife sheath found. And so the individual saying the fact that they keep mentioning the fixed bladed knife was used, I suppose that means they found the knife sheath, indicates that Pappa Rodger knew the knife sheath was left behind. Now, I've seen some people, and I just want to point this out, who said, oh, well, that was just a guess. Of course, a knife has a knife sheath, so that was just a lucky guess. I think that's ridiculous. That if Pappa Rodger, this person, had literally said, I suppose they found the knife sheath, that is not, to me, just automatically presumed because a fixed-bladed knife was mentioned that there would have been a knife sheath left behind. The wounds themselves would have indicated that a fixed-bladed knife was used, and so therefore there has no presumption that a knife sheath was left behind. I don't know if you're following my logic. In other words, what I'm saying is, if Pappa Rodger did indeed, and it seems like it was, I haven't gone back. The hard part about the Pappa Rodger story, by the way, before I finish that thought, was that to get now screen grabs of what everything that Pappa Rodger said, now we have to question whether or not that's been altered, because there's screen grabs people have of all of Pappa Rodger's posts and what time he did it, but people can alter those things, and so we don't know if it's the original order or if it was the original post of Pappa Rodger's, because things get manipulated. And so now I don't even know how to verify for sure that the things that are online being said by Pappa Rodger's were the things that Pappa Rodger said. But the point being is that this individual, Pappa Rodger, talked about the fixed bladed knife, and that would be huge. There was also comments from Pappa Rodger pointed out in this episode that Pappa Rodger was saying that the white Elantra was a red herring, that it wasn't a big deal. It was being overstated by the law enforcement. And here's what's interesting about that for you to understand. In the episode, this was posed as, so it was very clear in the episode that they believe Pappa Rodger is indeed Bryan Kohberger, and that it was no coincidence that the postings of Pappa Rodger stopped when Bryan Kohberger was arrested. They make it clear that they believe 100% that Bryan Kohberger is Pappa Rodger, or Bryan Kohberger was posing as Pappa Rodger, commenting on his own crimes. Now, what they will say in the episode was that Bryan Kohberger's talking about the white Elantra being a red herring is proof that he was just trying to mislead law enforcement or mislead the public by trying to throw them off of his white Elantra. Again, I want to say that for me, this doesn't make a whole lot of sense to mention the knife sheath instead of trying to throw that off or whatever, but to just focus on the Elantra being a red herring, to me, shows a logic flaw in my opinion. What I think is more likely to be the case is that the white Elantra is being overstated by law enforcement. Suspect Vehicle 1, that they continually show in split pieces of footage, this is Suspect Vehicle 1, and this is also Suspect Vehicle 1, and this is also Suspect Vehicle 1, may not have actually been Bryan Kohberger's car, or may not have always been Bryan Kohberger's car. It may be multiple cars. It may be a different car. So even if, follow the logic, even if Bryan Kohberger was involved in the crime, them talking about the white Elantra over and over and over again may have been why Pappa Rodger, if it was Bryan Kohberger, and if he was involved in the crime, said why he would say it's a red herring, because they're making more out of that white Elantra than is the case. Maybe Bryan Kohberger arrived a different way. Maybe he didn't arrive at all. Maybe the people who arrived in the crime scene came in a different type of vehicle. The point being is that if Bryan Kohberger is Pappa Rodger, and he's saying that the white Elantra is a red herring, or it's not as big of a deal as they're making it out to be, it might be, rather than him trying to throw the trail off, the fact that the white Elantra really wasn't a big focus of the deal, and that they're making that white Elantra fit to the story. I don't know if you followed the logic on that. So there's a logic to me that says Pappa Rodger could indeed be Bryan Kohberger posing as Pappa Rodger, and his comments about the white Elantra being not as big of a deal or a red herring could be because that was part of the state's weak case. That white Elantra wasn't a major piece of the case, and so maybe Bryan Kohberger, if he was Pappa Rodger, knew that. They had individuals in there who talked about, Bryan Kohberger's attitudes in school. And basically how they had an individual that was featured quite a bit in, I think, both episode 3 and 4, who claimed that he went to school with Bryan Kohberger and DeSales and referred to him as robotic, that he wasn't quite human. We're going to save a lot of those discussions about whether Bryan Kohberger is human for the last reaction video, where I cover some of that a little bit more detail. But he did talk about how Bryan Kohberger, they talked about in the episode how Bryan Kohberger's obsession with criminology in particular was a way for him to, and this is their speculation, and it may be true, to be fair, it could be true, that Bryan Kohberger's obsession with criminology was his way of masking that he was obsessed with murder and death. And so therefore, by going into criminology, you're allowed to ask questions about how do people feel when they kill, how does a crime scene look, what does a person think, because that would be, if you were to ask those kind of questions and you weren't in criminology, it would look awfully suspicious. But if you go into criminology, it's a way to mask your interest in death and murder and all those things. So that was what they suggested as well, that Bryan Kohberger's interest in criminology was merely to mask his fascination, his obsession with death and murder and serial killers. They talked a little bit about Catherine Ramsland and the BTK thing in there as well. So by the way, I wanted to say another thing that came out in that episode was the comment Bryan Kohberger allegedly made. They had the reporter saying the first thing that Bryan Kohberger allegedly asked when he was arrested was, has anybody else been arrested? This is something that people have speculated over and over again. Did that really get said? Did Kohberger really say that, or was that just a rumor that had no teeth to it whatsoever? Well, here's the kind of in-between thing. It's not a rumor that it was that statement was said. I saw on this documentary the reporter saying Bryan Kohberger, when he was arrested, first thing he said was, has anybody else been arrested? That was from a reporter. So if you want to say that the reporter might have just made that up, that's fine and dandy. But the actual source that somebody had said, Bryan Kohberger's first words were, has anybody else been arrested? That was reported. They showed the reporter talking about, that's exactly what he said, that Bryan Kohberger said, has anybody else been arrested? The reason why, of course, that's important is those who believe that Bryan Kohberger, whether he did or didn't do it, that this crime was not committed alone, indicates, if Bryan Kohberger asks, has anybody else been arrested, that maybe he knew he had co-conspirators. That would be the logic. People who believe that he had co-conspirators or that he knew somebody else did it, he might be asking, has anybody else been arrested, because he knows there's others involved. And now he's realizing perhaps that he's going to go down for this alone. And did it take 2.5 years for Bryan Kohberger, or 2.5+ years for Bryan Kohberger to finally come to the realization that no one else is going to come forward on this, and he's going to have to take the rap all by himself for something that he knew had multiple people involved? That's the $1 million question for me at the end of the day. If Bryan Kohberger was involved, did he do it alone? I see every reason to believe there's no way that he did that alone. I think that he had help. I think there's indications of that. And so the question becomes, did he do it at all? And if he did, who was the helpers, and will those helpers walk free because he's pled guilty to those? Another thing that was interesting to me about the Pappa Rodger connection that I haven't talked a whole lot about is the Elliot Rodger connection. And I want to point out, by the way, that Rodger, spelled R-O-D-G-E-R, is not the most common way to spell Rodger, either the first name or the last name. I verified this before I did this video. Rodger as a first or last name is more common in America to be spelled R-O-G-E-R without the D. The R-O-D-G-E-R spelling is less known of a spelling of the last name Rodger, or the first name Rodger for that purpose. So why is that important to me? Well, again, because one of the individuals that came forward in the documentary about Bryan Kohberger said that he was kind of super interested in Elliot Rodger. So now follow the logic. Here's where the documentary goes. Elliot Rodger was a quote unquote incel who wrote a manifesto after shooting people and going on a murder spree, and then getting, I think he killed himself in that, did he get shot and killed, or did he kill himself? I'm trying to remember Elliot Rodger's end. But the point being is that he ceased to exist. But Elliot Rodger, who was in his manifesto, described himself as an incel, and he had a hatred towards women. One of the most interesting things that comes out of that story was in the manifesto, Elliot Roger allegedly said that he hates all girls from the Alpha Phi or Alpha Phi sorority, which happened to be the exact sorority that Kaylee Gonzalez was associated with. So that makes it super interesting. So now you have these kind of connections. This incel, Elliot Roger, had a thing about against pretty girls, that he felt like that he was rejected by pretty women, which is the story that they keep telling you about Bryan Kohberger, that he was an incel and that he hated women because they were pretty and he couldn't have pretty women. This is what Elliot Rodger allegedly wrote in his manifesto. And the most interesting part of that, of course, is that Elliot Rodger indicated that he hates all women or all girls from Alpha Phi, which is the sorority Kaylee went to. And I've stated before many, many times that I believe that Kaylee Gonzalez was the focus of that attack. She was the target. Now, the question you have to ask yourself, the million-dollar question you have to ask yourself that nobody's been able to prove yet, is how, if Bryan Kohberger did, or whoever targeted, because again, there's a possibility that somebody else is Pappa Rodger. Now let's follow this logic before I finish this off. Let's finish this thing. So yes, Pappa Rodger allegedly stopped writing and stopped posting when Bryan Kohberger was arrested. And so that suggests to you, or to many people, that Bryan Kohberger was indeed Pappa Rodger. And that's why the posting stopped when Bryan Kohberger was arrested. However, the other possibility is that whoever did the killings was posting as Pappa Rodger. And when Bryan Kohberger was arrested, and it may not have been the killer, but when Bryan Kohberger was arrested for the crime, them stopping writing as Pappa Rodger would lead everyone to believe that they got the right guy and that Pappa Rodger was the killer, and that that was Bryan Kohberger. It would take the heat off of them. So there's a scenario in which Pappa Rodger not posting after Bryan Kohberger was arrested could mean it was somebody else who took the opportunity of Bryan Kohberger being arrested to stop writing as Pappa Rodger and basically let it look like, hey, that's that guy. And so that is a logic you go down to. So again, let's point out, for example, in the thumbnail, that Bryan Kohberger's image, the one that he's kind of oriented in the same physical direction as Pappa Rodger, those images look extremely close together. Unfortunately, on my thumbnail, the picture that I borrowed had the nose cut off, and I couldn't find one that was easy to grab, so I went with the one with the nose cut off. But their nose looks very similar. The facial features look very similar. Bryan Kohberger and Pappa Rodger look very similar. Was that done on purpose, either by Bryan Kohberger himself or somebody who wanted to frame or make the connection of Bryan Kohberger? So that's the other $1 million question. And again, the spelling of Pappa Rodger with R-O-D-G-R and Elliot Rodger, R-O-D-G-E-R, even though that's not the most common spelling of that name, suggests that there was a connection, that Pappa Rodger with the R-O-D-G-E-R wanted to make the connection to Elliot Rodger, R-O-D-G-E-R. So that's, again, not the most common spelling. So it makes you think that this may be the case. And again, let's do this. I think when Elliot Rodger was deceased, he was younger than Bryan Kohberger when Bryan Kohberger was arrested. So Pappa Rodgers, did the killer, or did Bryan Kohberger view himself as the elder, the father of Elliot Rodger in a way? Now, ironically enough, I think Bryan Kohberger was younger than Elliot Rodger if they had both lived out their days. But again, Kohberger lived longer than Elliot Rodger and therefore is older than him at the point of his arrest. So did Pappa Rodger become kind of this, I'm the father figure of Elliot Rodger? Was there some kind of connection in Bryan Kohberger's mind to an incel who hated women, in particular sorority girls like Elliot Rodger? And is that why he picked essentially a house that was a known party house on Greek Row, or around Greek Row? So again, this was the 1122 King Road residence, was all around the frats and sororities. It was a house known for parties. And so did he pick it because it was on Greek Row? And again, did he pick Kaylee as the target because simply of the alpha phi or phi, but I'm not sure how you pronounce that because I think it's supposed to be phi. But anyways, point being is that did he pick that that target, Kaylee, because of that reason? Now, the only part that's super weird about that, just rambling off of diarrhea of the mouth today, is that how did he know Kaylee was going to be back at the house that day if Kaylee was the target? Because again, Kaylee hadn't been staying at the house for a few weeks and was there. This leads into our final thought of this video, which is the Dylan Mortonson luring people into the house concept. There was a lot talked about Dylan, and to deflect the episode 3 and 4, both were trying to deflect the idea that there was anything wrong or suspicious about Dylan's behavior. It was stated that yes, Dylan was confused, and there was even a statement, and this is the shocker to me of episodes 3 and 4. I think it might have been in 4 that it came out. The shocker was that an individual, and I don't remember exactly. Well, I think I do, but I'm not going to say it. The point being, it doesn't matter. An individual states that it is possible Dylan did hear exactly what was happening in the house and knew what was going on, but it doesn't matter because she couldn't have done anything about it anyways. And so therefore it was kind of an excuse that, yes, maybe you're right. Maybe Dylan did absolutely hear the murders happening, and maybe it's okay because she couldn't have stopped the murders anyway. So cut her a break if she comes up with a story that deflect her guilt over the fact that she knew her friends had been murdered, but she couldn't do anything about it. They literally made that connection. Dylan might have heard, that was interesting to me, might have heard the murders, but just simply couldn't have done anything about it anyways, so therefore lied about not hearing it because it was she wanted to deflect the fact that she did nothing when there really couldn't have been anything she could have done about it anyways. Again, those who follow the story believe that Dylan's actions are far more suspicious than just that. Again, they pointed out in the episode how Dylan Mortonson hears all kinds of sounds, whispers, things like there's someone here, don't worry, I'm here to help you, but doesn't hear her friends screaming in pain as supposedly Kaylee's fighting back, as if supposedly Xana's. In fact, Dylan hears when Maddie and Kaylee come home, she hears them talking in the living room through her bedroom wall. So she can hear them talking, she can hear all these conversations, but she doesn't hear any screaming at all. And again, they point out that when she went down to Bethany's room, she asked Bethany, did you hear any of these things that were going on in the house? Bethany said no. And so then Dylan said, well, maybe I just dreamt the whole thing and imagined it. And so they said, and again, they had somebody come on to say, this is exactly the actions you would see of somebody who was terrified. She's terrified and she's getting things mixed up. Cut her some slack. That's exactly what would happen if you were terrified. So therefore, nothing suspicious. The whole episode of 3 and 4 was a lot of deflection of Dylan. Leave Dylan alone. She's innocent. She had nothing to do with these. She behaved exactly like anybody would in that situation. Even if she heard the murders going on, she couldn't have done anything about it anyways. So therefore, her deflecting and lying about it would have just been a deflection mechanism because she couldn't have helped them anyways. It's not her fault. She had nothing to do with the murders. So that is kind of the summation, if you will, of the major points of episodes 3 and 4 on the Elliot Rodger, Pappa Rodger, and Dylan situation. I just wanted to give those thoughts for you to kind of chew on and think about. I'm not giving a lot of my personal feeling about how things are happening. I'm trying to review to you what I captured on my mind when I was listening to it. And then the last episode that I'm going to do, I'm going to give you a little heads up in case you don't want to listen to the last episode. The last one is going to be, the last reaction video is going to be just about the emotions. There was a lot of talk in episodes 3 and 4 of the families and how they are choosing to deal with it, how they are choosing to stay off social media, and all the different things that they think people should do. It's going to be basically my closing thoughts on how people react to tragedy, and then pushing those feelings of how you think you want to react to tragedy onto other people and expecting everybody else to react the same way that you react to tragedy. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and I'm going to do it in a respectful manner to the families, because again, there's no problem. I have no problem with the families reacting the way that they have, but I want to talk a little bit about mental health issues, about anxiety, about some of you out there. If you are having an unhealthy relationship with this story, I want to give you some food for thought in that last episode. Don't let this story consume you. It is just a story. It's something that if you can do so in a healthy manner, then watch videos and whatever you can. I'm going to cover that more actually. Let me just get off this. I'm starting to make a soliloquy on my last reaction video. We'll save that for the last one. So again, for what it's worth, Episode 3 and 4 did a fairly good job of making a connection between Bryan Kohberger possibly being Pappa Rodger. Also did a fairly good job of giving you a psychological profile of why Bryan Kohberger may have been obsessed with killing and murder and trying to figure out how to do it, going into psychology because he was a psych major before he became a criminologist major, because he wants to understand why people do the things that they do. He wants to understand the mind of a killer. Maybe he wants to understand himself on why he thinks that way. That was what the episode's focus was on. It did a fairly good job of doing that. Again, I'm not weighing in on telling you whether or not I believe Bryan Kohberger is or isn't the killer, or whether I think that the show got it right. What I'm saying is the episode did a fairly good job of making a compelling argument, about why some of the actions of Bryan Kohberger are in school, and the things that people saw, his interactions with women, which by the way, I didn't touch on much, but he had difficulties with women. That was shown again, more evidence that Bryan Kohberger had difficulties with interactions with women and chose not to date because he felt that women were a distraction. Those things were all a compelling, put together narrative. Now, again, to close, anybody can make a compelling narrative when you just focus on one set of circumstances. So yes, it was a compelling narrative. It's something worth watching if you can handle it and it gives you good mental health. We'll talk about the mental health issues and how to deal with these kind of things in my last reaction video. Thank you for watching.